This PowerPoint presentation, with or without sound, can be gone through in your own time, together with further references, leaflets and other video presentations on the subjects raised on britishwildlifemanagement.net. The subject of the talk is Dartmoor, an area of outstanding management neglect, or should Dartmoor be a viable, productive and diverse farmed upland landscape delivering biodiversity? It's Learning from History, Part 15. These quotes are important. The first one, getting our food production sustainable, is the most urgent task for humanity. Continued commitment to the dominant economic model that has so glaringly failed the reality test is perhaps the greatest obstacle to implementing sustainable food systems. Mei Wan Ho. Sustainable development can be achieved only through the involvement of all stakeholders. This is a European Union statement from the Aarhus Convention in 1998. The problem in Britain has been that the stakeholders haven't even had a chance to discuss the issues, and they've been told exactly what to do. Third point, very important. It is proven that a well-managed grouse moor carries the highest biodiversity of plants, birds, mammals and invertebrates of any moorland. And that is a joint study by the RSPB, that's the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, and the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, who was then called the Game Conservancy. And this was published in the Journal of Applied Ecology in 2001. A very clear message about well-managed grouse moors. The fourth quote is bringing it all up to date with a letter to a Telegraph on October the 27th from Simon Banfield. I am a farmer. I hope the Prime Minister and Chancellor understand how I feel when, having spent a fortune on EU environmental compliance, the decline of farmland birds is still my fault. So let's start with some national history and background. Our British uplands represent around 50% of the land area of Britain over 600 feet, and much of it used by farming peoples over a period of more than 6,000 years, when the first farmers arrived from the Near East and cleared the dry, well-drained upland soils such as Dartmoor for barley, wheat, maize and grazing animals. Side fields on the west coast of Ireland, Pembrokeshire and the lowland Jurassic geology from Dorset to the Yorkshire coast, including Avebury and Stonehenge, were settled by immigrant farmers and graziers, thereby putting in place all the components of mixed farming and civilized living. This is a wonderful image of Grimes Pound on Dartmoor, a late Bronze Age village for graziers and farmers, abandoned in 1159 BC due to the massive Hekla stratovolcanic eruption in Iceland. Tin ingots were found in a Bigbury Bay wreck, dated from a ship's timber at 3000 BC. So there was a lot going on Dartmoor, right from that date of 4200, right the way through to this Grimes Pound being abandoned. Dartmoor and Bodmin Moor are particularly interesting in the historical record because they are both gold-bearing granite outcrops. Bodmin Moor was the site of a magnificent observational astronomy complex, now proven by computer analysis of the alignments marked out on the ground by 12 stone circles and over 90 ridgetop stone cairns, dated to 2500 BC, which is the same time as 100 pyramids were being built on the Giza Plateau, and the two are tied together, but you'll have to look at one of the other Learning from Histories to pick up the background of that. Gold, tin and the highest quality quartz attracted traders from the Near East from the earliest times. This is a map from The Growth of Civilization by W.J. Perry, which is a must-read for any historian. That is a photograph I took of one of the Bodmin Moor ridgetop cairns, and from this particular site you could look across the valley to this hill, top of the hill, and see another ridgetop cairn, a large one, on the centre of the skyline, as seen from the previous image. The ridgetop cairns were constructed thus You can still see the retaining ring on many of these where the stone has been taken away for building stone walls. And the very important point here is the word Cornwall means Cerno, that's the ancient name for Cornwall, Cerno, and Cerno means rock piles, the land of the cairns. And this is from The Shining Ones by Christian and Barbara Joy O'Brien. Another wonderful image of the great central reeve on Dartmoor. Massive stones, superior central administration and planning of field systems at a very early date. Seen also at side fields and in Pembrokeshire. This is a reeve below White Tor, West Dartmoor. Again, very large stones. Sections of a parallel reef system north of Yar Tor, very clearly laid out on the ground. This is central organisation and planning which we would expect from the city-state type people who came here, and archaeologists have made the point that it was so much more sophisticated and then developed into smaller, more irregular fields at a much later date. I've included this image because it's very much uplands, and it's walled livestock pens and gardens for food crops, thanks to dung, urine and seaweed in this case, because we can see the sea quite close there. You find this pattern all over the world, particularly in Africa, where people graze their animals outside the homesteads during the day and bring them in at night, very often simply for protection from the wild beasts, but also so that they get all the benefits of the dung when the cattle come in at night in the various enclosures, which then are rotationally used for growing the vegetables that people need. Very interesting feature, and you can see the remains of these type of settlements all over the world, going back 7, 8, 9,000 years. Gradually the whole of the British Isles was populated. Land tenure was in common ownership, allocated for the common good until Roman privatisation. Much of the common land survived both privatisation and the more recent enclosure acts, the last of which enclosed land in Lincolnshire in the late 1880s. The main areas of common land today are the largest block, covering parts of Cumbria, Lancashire and Yorkshire, together with West Northumberland, Upland Wales, Exmoor, Dartmoor, Bodmer Moor, and the lowland, New Forest and parts of Suffolk and Norfolk. All have commoners' rights and regulations under the law, requiring local management decisions. Very important that local people were expected to make the decisions on how those commons were managed. Since the earliest times, special features such as upland and lowland heather moorland were created on acid soils and maintained in good condition. We have 80% of the world's heather moorland, rarer and as important as rainforest. These areas were encouraged and developed under man's benevolent guiding hand to provide the crucial winter food for livestock and indirectly wildlife, alongside rich fishing. Society was administered centrally under the ancient and very successful city-state system of social organisation, brought from the Near East, without priests and politicians and without major conflicts. Originally priest was another name used for king. The farmer, stockman, shepherd and fisherman as suppliers of food led the communities. Immigrants to Britain were allocated 3 to 5 acres of land to feed their families and given free passage through the country. Agriculture thrived in the unique temperate climate, and Britain was a major exporter of a wide range of products including grain, wool, hides, metals, minerals, clever hunting dogs, boats and flints from before 5000 BC. The people were provided with the ancient Gorsedd or Brethren laws in the British Isles, including Ireland. A free health service was provided and superb, again, social organisation. Their motto was the truth before the world, and they regarded men, women and visitors with equal respect. Communities were mostly peaceful, governed by local kings and qualified Druid advisors, until Roman Catholicism was imposed upon the people by force from 596 AD, in preference to British Christianity. British Christianity was a restatement of Druidism by the first appointed Pendragon, King of Kings, Cunobalinius, who reigned from Colchester between 10 AD and 27 AD, before handing over to his sons and retiring as Archdruid. He successfully united the British Isles under Roman Emperor Augustus's Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. Trade was the priority for all Roman citizens, provided there was the basic principle of a willing seller and a willing buyer, with a binding handshake on the deal. The intensive management so deployed encouraged a rich biological diversity of species upon which man could sustain a healthy existence and ultimately benefit in a number of subtle ways. Beautiful open landscapes, efficient and surplus grass to meat production, eventually encouraging tourists, and the provision of a wide range of recreational activities. Some 200 craft trades and guilds sustained communities which thrived and grew in number and prosperity. Britain was the centre of the world in terms of civilised enlightenment and progress, having inherited a large part of the advanced knowledge handed down from Canaan and Sumer well in advance of the Egyptians and Greeks. The Greeks received their writing from the Druids. And here we go back to 4000 BC on the Euphrates to give you some idea of the sophistication. And this is Mari, on the upper Euphrates, one of the greatest ever Golden Age trading city-states, a product of the Divine Council appointed kingship, the laws, the original earliest laws, the edicts of An and Enlil, and the brilliant social organisation of the Anunnaki. You'll notice that this town is beautifully planned and laid out, incorporating water, irrigation, field systems, etc. You'll also see that the outer wall contains orchards and what were called clay pits for making the bricks which were used in building things. So every town had this large percentage of trees and clay pits as well as houses. Wonderful centralised planning. Now we come to the hot topic, which is getting everybody very hot under the collar, and that's the importance of understanding climate change, its impact in the past, and not believing the evidence presented by the International Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, acceptance of which could bankrupt compliant nations. I went right back to the specialist in climate change over 10 years ago, and this is one of the most important documents because it gives you a picture showing the end of the last glacial, and this is really what we call the start of the Holocene at that point in time, after the Great Younger Dryas Ice Age. We get a very rapid warming up after the Ice Age when 40% of the planet was frozen. And then we go through periods of warm periods and cold periods, and you can see them all laid out there. The highest bump on the chart is the Holocene climatic optimum, round about 4,200, when people were coming to Dartmoor. It was 2 degrees warmer than now then, with about double the rainfall. Then we have a drop in temperature and a drop in progress, and that's 4,200, and when we get the big migrations of people from the Near East into the British Isles. The climate had driven them. The monsoon rains had moved south. You have the next bump is about 2,300, 2,400 when the pyramids were being built, and before another major catastrophe which finished off the Golden Age and most of the great city-states across the area of Mesopotamia and eventually to China. All the way through here you have what is called episodes of human migration during the cold times, and during the very warm times you may have had the panic that, oh God, it's getting very hot, it's the end of the world. But as you can see, after every warm period the climate goes cold again. This is the important chart, trends in global temperatures 3000 BC to 2000 AD. Note the cyclical nature of the warm periods, the Minoan warm period, the Roman warm period, medieval warm period, and, we're right in it now, the late 20th century warm period. You also see the fluctuations in temperatures. The big lines are the averaged out from the extreme temperatures. But you get that up and down cyclical movement of the climate and temperatures. Now at 0.004% of greenhouse gases, CO levels follow temperature and do not cause warming. And also on this chart you see very clearly on the right hand side, yes, a rise in temperatures, but that's no hockey stick. It's a hockey stick if you go back to 1000 AD, but it ain't no hockey stick if you go back to 3000 BC. And the hockey stick was the reason for all the excitement from the IPCC, who have been backpedaling and trying to cover their tracks for the last 15 years. Global average temperatures, 1979 to 2006, the lower troposphere. Note the two cooling periods caused by large volcanic eruptions. That's El Chichen and Pinatubo, and the 1998 peak in temperature. We've had 16 years of cooling following that peak in temperature in 1998. The planet is not warming, it's been cooling. Large volcanic eruptions are interesting because they put so much ash into the atmosphere that blocks out the sun, and that's why you get those sudden drops in temperature following those changes. And we also can track El Nino here, which is the movement in the hot and cold currents in the Pacific, which have a major impact on the world's temperature. Cosmic rays related to sunspot activity, 1950 to 2010. Weaker sunspots in blue equate with weaker magnetic fields, which allow an increase in cosmic radiation. More cosmic radiation creates more low-level clouds, which cool the oceans. Colder oceans cool planet Earth. And this is a comment by one of the great climatologists, Bob Carter, who I've been following, about 8 or 9 people who really knew what it was all about from the start. And this is his comment, recent comment. It's over, finished, dead, kaput. Surely no one who so much glances at the chart above can give any credence to climate alarmism ever again. And the key point there is this relationship with lower number of sunspots, lower magnetism, and cosmic ray increase. And the cosmic rays are creating the cooling of the Earth. And this is because they create low-level clouds, and the low-level clouds cool the oceans. He says here, it is the most stunning refutation of global warming hysteria that I've ever seen. I've been following the debate for years, but I've never seen the case made so graphically, in both the literal and metaphorical senses of the word. And I've just made this key point myself, trying to sum it up. Climate change is caused by the external magnetic forces as we travel through the arms of the Milky Way galaxy. It has nothing to do with totally beneficial CO2. The scientific base for this conclusive proof is set out in Learning from History Part 1 in 2007, where I featured The Chilling Stars by Henrik Svensmark and Nigel Calder. Now confirmed by CERN, that's the big research establishment in Switzerland, and the Danish Space Agency, who've carried out more research to confirm and deal with any questions or queries or criticisms that was made of their research. And this is a postscript on this particular section. It's so important that we don't go off with all the wrong ideas about what's happening to the climate. Professor Henrik Svensmark is a physicist at the Danish National Space Institute and director of the Centre for Sun Climate Research at the Danish Space Research Institute. He's been invited to speak about his research at the House of Commons on Wednesday the 3rd of December 2014, and this meeting is open to the public. I'm trying to suggest many of our politicians do go so they can stop the enormous sums of money which we're allocating because of the Climate Change Act, which will all be totally wasted and to a country that's basically already bankrupt. Now I'm getting back to the uplands. I'm going to introduce our upland grazing animals and the wildlife which lives and thrives alongside them. Back to Devon, South Devon cattle. In the summer months, herds of South Devon and North Devon cattle were driven up onto Dartmoor for the summer grazing. Wonderful image there of shorthorn cows and calves in the uplands. Dartmoor ponies below Haytor. Numbers down from 30,000 to 1,000. Processing and export of Dartmoor labelled horse meat offers their only real chance of survival and restoration of numbers. Hard fact. We've got to take it. Swaydales, one of the great upland breeds, and this is from the National Sheep Association, and they say a new report on climate change highlights the importance of upland farmers in securing future food supplies. Well, certainly, if it gets very hot or it gets very cold, sheep are going to be needed. This slide is of a hardy, hefted upland ewe with a single strong lamb, both able to survive and thrive in the hardest conditions on their hefted patch on the hill. A product of thousands of years of grazing management evolution, now seriously threatened. Hefting in practice, here you have a family group on a patch of hill, and they go back to the same patch of hill on which they've been born and bred. That's why you see sheep so well scattered and spread over the uplands of Britain. Interfering with that system has been disastrous because it's upset the hefted animals and animals that have been taken off and then moved back again. It causes absolute chaos to this fantastic system. These are young herdwicks making the grassroots grow and providing dung and urine for the insects high up in the hills where trees cannot grow. Now the heft or heath or heaths, this extract is from a plea to Tony Blair on destocking consequences by Richard Maudsley, a time when we're all very worried about what the government was doing and still are. The heath or heft is the territory occupied by a flock on the open hill. The individual sheep live and move within these boundaries according to season and weather. Each lamb inherits its mother's patch, and out on the hill it is possible to pick out family groups made up of different generations. The heathing of flocks involves a lot more than teaching them the boundaries, which are rarely more than a stream, a ridge, a rough track. That alone, from personal experience, takes from 3 to 5 years. From my yard gate one can walk over hills and mires for 5 miles as the crow flies, before coming to the next fence. To drive from the same yard right round the fell and back is a 30-mile trip. That gives some idea of the scale of some of the commons on which there are many heaths. Again, cattle up on the National Trust Hill Farm on Snowdonia. Red grouse, Howden Moor in the Peak District. Now, harvesting a surplus of grouse pays for the good management. Just get that point really clear. When we harvest grouse or go grouse shooting, what we're doing is we're putting money into the management of the uplands where there are heather and grouse moors. Some of the 32 red and amber list of endangered moorland birds: black grouse, lapwing, golden plover, a ring ouzel, where there is now several on Dartmoor, godwit, curlew, meadow pipit, skylark. Some more of the 32 red and amber list of endangered moorland birds. The merlin on the left. It's called the gamekeeper's sentry. The gamekeeper says they're my little sentry. They always make noises that tell the gamekeeper what's happening on the beat. Then you've got grey partridge, which are up on the moors, but they're more of a lowland species, but they thrive very well in areas like Hampshire, and they do well on the high ground, but they are literally disappearing on a downtrend, and we're trying, or country people are trying to reverse that downtrend. Twite, wheatear, stonechat, greenshank, dunlin and wimbrel. And remember, all these seabirds by the seashore, they very quickly fly up to the moorlands for their holidays and for feeding at different times of the year. So it's an important, very important place for seabirds. And here is the hen harrier, which I'm sure you've all heard about. You won't have heard about the endangered species. I'm telling you about the endangered species. Hen harrier takes all the publicity, unjustly in my opinion, and these are the facts. The hen harrier has been placed on the red list, but is not endangered. England and Wales are on the limit of its normal nesting range. As a ground nesting raptor, its flying behaviour indicates the position of its nest to all other predators in sight. This year's breeding success on Howden Moor was terminated by fledgling being predated by buzzards and a goshawk. Same problem occurred at Langholm, where all the research was being done on the hen harrier, and we found that the young were being predated by buzzards, goshawks and other predators. Nesting success outside managed ground moors is no more successful. Predation and human disturbance are major factors. And one of the main areas of human disturbance, when somebody hears about a hen harrier, all the twitchers rush off to look at it, and that's a sure way of stopping it from nesting successfully. And remember, 2 hen harriers will consume thousands of red and amber list species each year. Staggering amounts of endangered species being eaten by a species which is not endangered. Birds at risk, thanks to the RSPB. And I'm repeating here what I've said. This is a quote from the Moorland Association, just not me. I'm following what other people, the experts, know about this situation. 10 of the 46 bird species occurring regularly on heather moorland are on the UK's red list of species of greatest conservation concern, and 22, including the wild grey grouse, is on the amber list. Now that amounts to some 32 endangered bird species. They're prey, we call them prey, and they're eaten and threatened by the abundance of raptor and other predators, which includes the hen harrier, and none of which are endangered. The RSPB is to blame for the astonishing failure to manage their own moorland, hostility to landowners, grouse shooters and gamekeepers, planting evidence, clearly demonstrating an unsatisfactory political agenda, and contempt for keeping the essential management balance between predator and prey, which is a basic wildlife management law. That is behaviour totally unworthy of a royal charity. Here is their own research. It should also be noted that since becoming protected 50 years ago, 14 of 15 species of raptors found in Britain are now stable or increasing, and are at their highest levels since proper records began. Of these, 9 species regularly hunt on grouse moors in England: merlin, kestrel, common buzzard, goshawk, sparrowhawk, hen harrier, red kite, peregrine falcon and hobby. This not only further increases the pressure on vulnerable prey species, but also creates competition for food, territories and nest sites between these protected species, and it is usually the stronger ones that win. Anyone with intelligence can see that compulsory private sector predator control, including common raptors, as a condition of receiving CAP, Common Agricultural Policy payments, is a key solution to the massive decline in so many important species. Heather moorland has to be managed. RSPB research shows that in some rare upland wading birds are up to 5 times more abundant on moorland managed for grouse than on other moorland. Far from harming wildlife, the controlled burning that is undertaken by gamekeepers on grouse moors actively helps prevent the uncontrolled wildfires that all too frequently occur elsewhere and which cause such destruction. Heather moorland is a semi-natural habitat which has been managed by people ever since clearance and grazing started thousands of years ago. It is not a natural environment. Like a rainforest which can sustain itself, heather has to be looked after. If not managed, heather grows into a dense mass of long woody stems that support very little wildlife, has no grazing or economic value, and is very hard to walk through. The economic value of moorland. Over the years, the purpose of management has evolved. For the last few hundred years, it has been a mixture of sheep, hardy upland cattle, managed grass, and in some areas deer. Almost the only species of economic value that can survive all year round on the moors. Grazing and rotational burning has produced a beautiful mosaic of different ages of heather, which also provides food and shelter for a wide range of other birds and other species. International status. Because of this management, more than 60% of England's upland sites of special scientific interest are managed grass moors, and that many are also designated special protection areas for rare birds and special areas of conservation for rare vegetation under European wildlife directives, the highest possible protection. Quote there from Adrian Blackmore, who's been one of the key people in promoting the Moorland Association. Another species in the uplands is our red deer stag. On the Quantocks and Exmoor, it was possible for walkers to get close to and enjoy seeing the red deer. The current restriction of the deer hunt to 2 hounds creates real problems in moving, inspecting and dispersing the deer, as well as finding casualties, and this creates many unnecessary welfare problems, together with less incentive to keep the high numbers, tolerated in the past by the land custodians. In consequence, more deer are being indiscriminately shot and poached outside the careful selection process of the hunt harbourers. They were saved from extinction on Exmoor in 1825 by the deer hunt, when there were about 20 survivors, and numbers eventually built up on Exmoor to 3,500 and 900 on the Quantocks. Justifiably, in my opinion, the finest example of species management on the planet, now under threat from politicians who don't understand. Dartmoor can easily carry 2 large herds of well-managed deer with an amendment to the Hunting Act, removing the crazy 2-hound limit. Now back to the uplands and agriculture. The British government's target in 1962 was for the creation of the most efficient food production industry in the world. In reality, this was largely achieved without further overall loss of wildlife habitats and massive progress in the quality of wildlife and food-friendly farm technologies, together with increased productivity. This situation changed when we joined the European Union, to the detriment of farming communities. The stockman, shepherd, keeper, forester, huntsman, stalker, gilly, terrierman, earthstopper, lurcher and ferretmen, together with upland and river game management and harvesting, paid for by sportsmen, all led by enlightened land managers and custodians, created the crucial balance between predator and prey species, thereby delivering a productive paradise for all interests, including employment and tourism. Self-sufficiency in food was the self-evident main advantage and purpose, and past records of traditional fish and game bags reveal that this self-sufficiency extended across a highly productive, balanced landscape with a wide number of species, which included space for mankind and nature. Intensive best practice upland farming, therefore, went hand in hand with rich wildlife habitats, high numbers of species, and a surplus of food for export and trade. On joining the common market in 1972, British farmers were subjected to the EU Common Agricultural Policy, CAP, and other compliances and red tape, which disadvantaged profitability. EU directives were gold-plated by successive British governments, who handed powers to the EU without the consent of the British people, contrary to our written British Constitution and rule of law, 1688-9. Over that time, resulted in the wholesale transfer of sovereignty to EU institutions by means of a series of treaties. The Single European Act, 1986, the Maastricht Treaty, 1992, the Amsterdam Treaty, 1997, the Nice Treaty in 2001, culminating in the Lisbon Treaty of 2009. Britain's long-run constitutional arrangements, including those essential aspects of democracy applauded by Churchill, can only be recovered if Britain leaves the EU, which is a very simple and straightforward process and will not affect our trade. We can probably increase our trade by leaving the EU. We have lost most of our important fishing industry as a consequence of joining the common market. Our fishermen warned that farming would be next. We see growing pressures from subversive EU-funded organisations who threaten much of what is good about our great country. In reality, our country has become deeply divided, threatened with breakup, as a consequence of these misguided EU policies, political divisions and divided loyalties. If Britain is to survive and prosper with all our friends and fellow language speakers around the world, including the Commonwealth, we, the people, need to be more than a star on an EU flag or part of an EU RSP designed nature park. We have a wonderful history, great traditions and a superb written constitution and rule of law, all of which has been fought and died for in many wars and conflicts. Our constitution requires the balance between the separate powers of the Crown, the Lords and the Commons to be restored in order to achieve balanced and knowledgeable good governance. The EU is besieged with economic problems, largely its own creation. A disastrous, unbalanced, one-size-fits-all, inefficient bureaucracy and inevitable catastrophe. In order to be able to help the EU change direction and reform peacefully, we have to immediately cut our current ties with them, lead from the front, restore our constitution and rule of law, and put our own house in order, so they can follow using our traditional proven system of government as adopted elsewhere all around the world. The British people together have to stop the United Kingdom from breaking up, and above all keep our good name and international identity untainted by the EU's failed left-wing socialism and the ever-present ambitions of the Roman Catholic Church. Saving the uplands and the country. I've stretched the remit here, but I think you can understand what I'm trying to say. Under a good government, modern techniques and mechanisation can bring back the best of the past in our uplands, be highly productive economically and surpass all biodiversity targets. Wildlife and countryside management best practice will only be possible if everybody understands the issues and works together in encouraging and allowing a good enough administration to put our bankrupt country back into all-round productivity and profit. I'm now coming on to this very important issue of food security, which links into this talk on the uplands. Food security for Britain and the world. And this lovely quote from Chief Sitting Bull, which everybody should remember. White man can make everything, but cannot distribute it. And he said that on a visit to see the President and cover the east coast of America and see all that was going on. And he was very impressed. But the white man can make everything, but cannot distribute it. And this is not long before he was shot in the back on December the 15th, 1890. We now import approaching 55% of all food required in Britain, 66% in monetary terms, with no thought and planning for the return to the inevitable cyclical disruptions and extinctions clearly seen in the historical records. Food and water security must be a great cause of concern, and urgent action is required. These were the views taken by a recent important cross-party parliamentary committee. This is a political response to the food security crisis from the Irish Agricultural Commissioner in the 2nd of October. However, world demand for food is rising. It is expected to increase by 60% by 2050. And he says, we are uniquely positioned to take advantage of that demand. There's a big question mark over that in my opinion, and I'm going to go on to explain why. We need to be able to produce in a way that safeguards those natural resources on which high-quality agricultural production depends in the long run. Now, these grass-based crops feed the world, along with grazing land from the equator to the Arctic tundra. Rice, wheat, maize, sorghum, millet, barley. Worldwide average yields of corn, rice and wheat nearly tripled between 1950 and 2000, a period that saw global population do the same. The projected need to feed a projected world population of 9 billion in the year 2050, while maintaining present averages, is shown on the right. On the right of that chart you can see corn, rice and wheat and the projected need. Massive increases. The problems we have, though, are that yields are now topping out, and external shocks of drought and cold will lead to famine. It's inevitable. We're already seeing famine in some parts of the world already. It's not likely to get better without a lot of luck and a lot of dramatic change in attitude. It should be clear from the above chart that all land in the United Kingdom capable of producing food should be fully utilised. Grazing animals in rotation with cereals and other arable crops are crucial in maintaining soil quality in order to maintain or increase the required yields. Store cattle and sheep have always been raised in the uplands to supply the demand for fattening on lowland grazing, or fed surplus lowland produce. The uplands can produce grains as in the past. Next key figure, key factor. Currency, the value of the pound against the value of other currencies around the world, of our competitors. When other countries devalue their currency, such as New Zealand, 50% devaluation, the EU and Japan, they gain a trading advantage over their competitors. This creates losses for those countries with strong currencies, putting many of their businesses out of business. Failure to address currency factors is one reason why British farmers rely on welfare payments in providing the public with cheap food. World currency movements must not be allowed by the UK government to remove a level playing field for farming and industry profitability. Margaret Thatcher negotiated a rebate for the farming industry at Fontainebleau in 1983. Because currency differentials between the euro and the pound seriously disadvantage British farming profitability. An amount of some 35 billion over more than 20 years failed to reach the farming industry. Agriculture Minister at the time, John Gummer, confirmed this dreadful state of affairs 3 years ago and blamed Margaret Thatcher. By the time Tony Blair was involved with the EU rebate, the reason for claiming it had been lost. He in fact returned it, thereby ensuring, among other factors, e.g. the dumping of heavily subsidised food products from abroad, farm gate prices for most farmers remained below the cost of production. The reasons for the rebate are still lost by those in charge. The current inevitable devaluing of the euro and the expected strength of the pound on our potentially abundant cheap energy supplies, utilising fracking technology for deep gas and gas from coal, will create unfair world market conditions for British agriculture, lowering farm gate prices below profit even further than they are now. Compensation must be allocated to maintain stability and even keep the industry. This currency factor has already brought British farming to the point of relying on welfare payments and closing down important production skills, food processing and investment. The farming industry is following the fishing industry with the increased reliance on imported food products and all the problem that situation creates for our security. Conclusion. Government is simply not aware of the many problems building up through the failures in understanding world currency movements and manipulation. Cheap, heavily subsidised food is still being dumped unfairly upon our markets without thought of the serious consequences. The vision of a viable, diverse and farmed upland landscape delivering biodiversity can be put in place very quickly once all involved recognise the terrible mistakes that have been made. Uplands have improved grazing, grassland, in-by-land, moorland and Grays Hill are grossly underutilised. Huge shortages of food are forecast worldwide and added risk from a colder climate. We have first-class agricultural land in the uplands, which must no longer be totally neglected. Now let's look at some of this neglect. And my key point is about Dartmoor and what I've regarded as an area of outstanding management neglect. And I'm going to go into some of these key points so people understand the detail. This is, I produced this document and sent it to Natural England. I did get a response which was, yes, we agree, but we're doing what we're told to do by DEFRA. Anyway, here we go, Natural England charge sheet from 2000 to 2013. Catastrophic decline in habitat quality since English Nature and Natural England took over, threatening farmers that subsidies would not be paid if they did not do what they were told. If farming in the uplands and lowlands of Britain were placed by good government on a level playing field with their competitors, there would be no need to put farming industry on welfare. Pillar 2, which is the greening element of CAP, is money down the drain without compulsory predator control, headage payments, disease control and prevention of human disturbance of wildlife. The uplands, devastated by Labour and the RSPB's upland clearances, requires capital investment to utilise the new proven technologies which can provide a tenfold increase in the carrying capacity for cattle, sheep and wildlife, and also boost tourism and other upland enterprises. The cost on Dartmoor since 1998 is around 126 million. And these are the list of problems: neglect, catastrophic decline in wildlife, catastrophic increase in most predators and declines towards extinction of many vulnerable prey species, catastrophic decline in Dartmoor ponies, rank unpalatable grasses infested with ticks, overgrowing Bronze Age archaeology, unburnt mature heather infested with heather beetle, out of control bracken creating sterile landscapes unsafe for tourists and walkers because of Lyme disease, pointless interference with the natural drainage of peat bogs using climate change arguments, reclassifying good unmanaged heather moorland as heathland in good condition in order that staff could meet their targets, unnecessary cost of stock housing borne by farmers through being forced to make the wrong choice of livestock. Farmers, commoners and graziers with their associated skills driven off the land and put out of business by pointless red tape and ongoing reductions in livestock numbers which no other business could or would tolerate. No consideration given to the situation in 2000 when English Nature regarded undergrazing to be as serious a threat as overgrazing. Lastly, catastrophic increase in at least 4 organisations and staff telling farmers, commoners and graziers what to do and almost certainly outnumbering them. Repeated all over Britain, upland farming communities have been deprived of viable business, have not been fairly compensated for loss of income, with the taxpayer paying massive unnecessary costs for no rewards. This is a very important case study. This is the RSPB upland management neglect, the Carngaffalet in mid Wales. Formerly heather moorland in good condition, a site of special scientific interest. And what you can see here is attempts to cut the heather, no burning taking place, no patchwork burning, 4 sheep trying to do something with it all, you can see in the bottom corner, being taken over by bracken, and that was just over 9-10 years ago. The RSPB's aggressive, misleading and untruthful political lobbying against landowners and gamekeepers calls for their own moorland management to be investigated. One example is the results of their management at Carngaffalet, created by generations of grazing managers. 1. 13 graziers were told to stop traditional patchwork burning of the heather, leading to loss of control of the ideal habitat. Loss of ideal habitat has curtailed traditional grazing management of cattle and sheep, with the loss of 10 graziers through lack of incentive. The subsequent loss of dung and urine has reduced the insect population and soil quality. The resulting undergrazing and lack of scrub control has led to 2 large accidental fires. possibly started by walkers, but there are many reasons for fires in the uplands, particularly when you see how dry the tinder is on the ground from the flailed bracken, and at times of the year when wind and a spark can produce massive fires. Heather has taken 6 to 7 years to partially recover from attempts at controlling by flailing, being smothered in pulp, whereas where burnt, regeneration took place in 3 years, proving that burning is essential, and being able to control and never have those big fires that do so much damage. 4. Out of control bracken and 4 feet high heather causes the remaining 3 graziers to lose their sheep and even their cattle, increasing costs and greatly complicating management and veterinary treatments. Ticks and heather beetle now present are causing serious uncontrolled problems. There is little effective vermin control, a 5-fold increase in the local badger population, and so much general predation that prey species numbers have collapsed. 30 to 40 grouse would have been seen regularly, now there appear to be none. Hen harriers were released into this area and have failed to survive the low food supplies, excessive predation, management neglect and human disturbance. There has been no attempt to discuss management with the graziers despite request. That was the situation. They have been talking recently, but it's all now much too late. Over time, the lack of grazing animals, dung, urine and grassroot growth has led to soil erosion and degradation. Everybody loses, and this pattern of neglect is typical of RSPB reserves. Well-managed moorland has more than 10 times the carrying capacity of habitat for livestock, deer and a wide range of wildlife species, including the endangered black grouse, lapwing, golden plover, ring ouzel, godwit, curlew, meadow pipit, skylark, merlin and grey partridge, which all fare better on moorland with gamekeepers, absent on RSPB properties. Why? Why don't the RSPB have gamekeepers? Another picture, this is 9 years later, and you can see here the heather, just thick heather, and bracken. That's before the bracken begins to grow. That'll all be covered in bracken soon. 2 sheep trying to make something of it, one looking at the camera, and of course it's all a very serious fire hazard, and I've taken pictures of the latest big burn up on the hills on the north side of Carngafalloch. The picture above was taken on June 2013 at Carngafalloch, showing little change from the picture taken 9 years earlier. Bracken is well established and the summer growth is beginning to break through and will soon dominate the area, which used to be one of the best quality areas for heather moorland in mid-Wales, fully productive for wildlife, including grass, and the provision of valuable quality winter food for sheep and cattle. Good stands of heather can take up to 40% loss from winter grazing. I have asked that the Natural Resources Wales enforce the legal requirement for this site to be returned to good SSSI condition. The RSPB's failed wilding experiments have at least shown the way forward in bringing back livestock and traditional management skills, which can now be applied using the new burning and reseeding technologies developed on Howden Moor by Jeff Eyre, which feature towards the end of this presentation. Who is to blame? Current catastrophic wilding, destocking policies instigated on the advice of the RSPB by the Labour government's Elliot Morley and Barbara Young in 2000, assisted by the EU, have produced a tick, heather beetle, bracken, rushes, gorse and wheatgrass infested wasteland, where the remaining predators are emptying the larder of prey species, in particular ground nesting birds, invertebrates, reptiles and young fish. The well-established guidelines used in assessing condition of sites of special scientific interest were cast aside in 2000, infringing the legal and tenant rights of the upland farmers, graziers and commoners. The dire consequences and damage of undergrazing was ignored, with sheep described as woolly maggots and threats to remove farming subsidies. Clearly misconduct in public office. Further evidence. As a result of the government's continued upland clearances based on the big lie in 2000 that overgrazing was an issue and undergrazing was not, we now have in Britain more acres of useless bracken, nardus and millennia wheatgrasses than wheat and barley. Research analysis by Professor Pateman from the John Hutton Institute demonstrated at the National Centre for the Uplands conference in May in 2014 that there never was any credible evidence to justify removing cattle and sheep from the uplands, some 50% of the land area of Britain. International specialist Alan Savory of the Savory Institute and the Africa Centre for Holistic Management sets out his case for grazing animals saving the planet, overturning any case for livestock removal. And on the videos, and they can be linked to by going to the BritishWildlifeManagement.net website. In addition, there is a marvellous video by Ola Williams on the State of Nature report, the catastrophic decline of wildlife and birds in Wales, and who he thinks is to blame. Also, Robin Page and Christopher Booker in The Telegraph have dealt with these issues, and it's up to people to follow up and look at all the people now queuing up to call for change on these issues. And of course, the people who have to take the final responsibility are the Department of the Environment and Rural Affairs. The extraordinary thing was I provided a submission to the Law Commission on all the wildlife management issues. And the Law Commission was instructed to remove the word management from their first publicised brief by the Department of the Environment and Rural Affairs, and to exclude any mention of hunting, either legal or illegal. And this is the brief, the original brief, which I did loads and loads months of work on, because I thought it was about wildlife management. Our overarching aim is to make the law work better for all concerned with wildlife. This includes ensuring that the statutory framework for wildlife management can facilitate the policy decisions of government and allow for the appropriate balancing of human-animal interests. That was the brief as originally presented. And management was removed. The word management was removed. That tells you exactly where the blame really lies, with that government department, which is still fully staffed by Labour Party people who were appointed by Elliot Morley and the Labour government over its 12 or so years in office. Action required. The viable, rich, biologically diverse environments of the uplands can be restored as soon as government and organisations like DEFRA and the RSPB wake up to and accept the catastrophic situation they have created and the vast sums of taxpayer money which they've wasted by not understanding wildlife management. So here we go on to understanding wildlife management. Two important quotes. Minister Elliot Morley, I've always singled him out for some of the problems, and he says here, his quote to me, he lost his temper with me and said wildlife do not need managing, at a partnership against wildlife crime, a meeting, annual seminar which I've attended since inception. And also Douglas Batchelor, the director of the League Against Cruel Sports, we should not play God. The greatest supporters of hunting in this country are former directors and staff of the League Against Cruel Sports who have all been brave enough to face up to the facts. And Richard Corse, Jim Barrington, Graham Searle, and several others have all been brave enough to say we were wrong. Very important. So let's look at what wildlife management means. Basic principles are simple. Successful wildlife management requires a solid three-legged stool of all year round. Habitat provision, homes for wildlife, quality food and water supplies, and protection. And this applies to virtually everything, even people living in the uplands. The same basic issues: habitat, quality food, water supplies and protection. And of course we're referring here to protection, human disturbance, particularly during the breeding and the spawning season. We have big issues with canoes destroying the spawning beds with their paddles and their canoes at crucial points in the year. It's not understood and realised. And the last thing, of course, is disease, and we have these massive problems now with disease, TB, foot and mouth, Lyme disease, and many others, which are real issues. Now, a failure in any one of these management roles will lead to the collapse of that management. People within the private sector who go hunting, shooting and fishing pay for this long-established and successful system of wildlife management, most importantly run by the crucial, skilled wildlife management specialists in all departments. The badly advised government's Department of the Environment and Rural Affairs, encouraged by the EU, the Labour Party charities RSPCA, RSPB, League Against Cruel Sports and Badger Trust, who lead the animal rights industry, has wasted enormous sums of money on a range of environmental, ecological and agricultural policies without gaining positive results by ignoring these basic wildlife management principles. As a result of species counts conducted by the RSPB, the Game and Wildlife Conservation Trust, Bird Guide, the British Trust for Ornithology, the Wildlife Trust and others, present a catastrophic decline in at least 600 important species throughout Britain. The private sector, able to provide solutions free of charge, must be allowed to restore best practice management based on these basic principles and resolve current problems as a government partner. The Charities Commission and police must be encouraged to act as effective regulators of the charities mentioned above and stop the funding of the Labour Party by the corrupt animal rights industry. And this is my conclusion, which basically sums up what I've found to be over 20 years to be the real nub of the issue. The Charities Commission and the police must be encouraged to carry out their statutory duties as effective regulators and enforcers of the law, directly involving the charities mentioned, and the activities of the unregulated and unpoliced animal rights industry as a whole, who have contributed well over 2 million to the Labour Party. There have been no satisfactory explanations or formal investigations, which are still required under the law, of the causes and the damaging political manipulation of swine fever, foot and mouth, BSE, avian flu, BTB, bovine TB, together with attacks on the farming, countryside and meat industries by political activists. So here we get on to upland habitat provision, and I'm calling it real homes and food for wildlife. Healthy heather, 2 years after reseeding, free from heather beetle, tick infestation, bracken and rank unpalatable grasses. A bee paradise. Beautiful picture when the heather is in full flower in the second week of August. And this is Jeff Ayres' Howden Moor model of upland management above. Through spraying a non-toxic salt-based chemical, 2-man managed burning and reseeding of heather and palatable grasses, bracken removal together with a range of keepering and predator control methods. New technologies and landscaping, with the creation of all year round water supplies and engaging local people, has created a tenfold commercially viable increase in cattle, sheep and wildlife species productivity over a 6,000 acre area of the Peak District, now a flagship of excellence created for the National Trust. And this is a quote by Jeff Ayres on his work. I find it is not rocket science to grow all moorland species, including mosses, where they want to grow. Even the rare plants that now support an environmental industry can be commercially grown if funds are available. I took on species-poor monocultures such as Nardus bracken Molinia plus bare peat, and can say that after 20 years anyone can visit my sites and judge for themselves if they look better. I have purely used agronomy methods, farming methods. And if there is a will to improve our species-poor areas to more diverse habitats, I see a need for bringing in more agronomists to supply the goods that the ecologists require. And this is a brief extract back again to the Savory Institute, which from their second international conference, and it encourages farmers and landowners across the world to regenerate worn-out soils by practicing holistic management. Well, holistic management, what I'm talking about, holistic means everything. It's easy to see the potential of restoring grasslands on the vast American plains, African savanna or Australian outback, but does planned grazing have a place in the UK? And this is an example. Tim May, Managing Director of 1,000 hectares at the Kingsclear Estate in North Hampshire, thinks so. He has sown 370 hectares with mixtures containing ryegrass, fastolium, timothy, cocksfoot, chicory, sainfoin, yarrow, burnet and red and white clovers. These will be down for 4 years before the fields go back into rape barley undersown with grass rotation. He told the conference he is turning to herbal lays and livestock, sheep now, cows later, to improve the depth and nutrient content of the soils. Where we have over-farmed the soils, we now have got to put nutrients and goodness back into those soils. And this is the way to do it, and livestock are a key part of that new revolution which is required if we're going to stand any kind of chance of producing enough food. And this image is, the seeds have been undersown in the corn crop, and they're just coming through. You can see the straw on the top at the end of in the autumn, when the sun and light's getting in, and they'll begin to grow. And this is also the future for upland grassland productivity. The motivation for taking such drastic action is to get the soils right so we can halt our ever-declining arable yields. By growing grasses, legumes and deep-rooting herbs, we can increase our soil structure, chemistry and biology. We need the animals to eat the grass and trample some of it into the soil to build organic matter while adding their manure. Grazed grass could become the most essential crop on our arable farm. Pasture-fed meat will be a useful byproduct of the system, and I believe the vastly improved soils would produce more grain from less external inputs. Using Herbal Lays to Rescue Soils by Alan Savory. This is a photograph from a report by Tom Greaves of the Dartmoor Society, where he deals very efficiently and effectively with the problems of what I call bog wetting, and some other people call it bog wetting, holding up water in the bogs on the uplands. And I've said here, water boards have wasted over 40 million of needless bog wetting, you see the digger in the background there, in the British uplands, on the excuse of needing carbon storage. And I've already made the point that CO2 is not an issue. We don't need to store it. In fact, peat's very, very good at looking after itself, and healthy peat is best not interfered with. Some damage, yes, fine, can be repaired. But damage to peat from undergrazing can be prevented by grazing. A lot of the damage is caused by undergrazing, and I'm going to come to that a bit later. And if you look down through that peat, or bog or moor, we find turf peat, an accumulation of partially decayed vegetation or organic matter that is unique to natural areas called peatlands or mires. In natural peatlands it takes thousands of years to develop the deposits of 1.5 to 2.3 metres, which is the average depth. The most common component is sphagnum moss, although many other plants can contribute to roots. And I've said here that sphagnum moss can be reseeded using Jeff Ayres techniques. Nothing we cannot farm or grow on the uplands to meet all the requirements of the ecologists. Peat digging for fuel. With the cotton grass there, we're going to see more cotton grass shortly. This is an American research statement, and it's very worthwhile repeating here for people who think that we should have taken all the cattle and sheep off. The root systems of prairie grasses form dense layers that survive drought and fire, allowing the plants to come back from year to year. Few trees survive because of the lack of rainfall, fire and the constant winds. The amount of rainfall determines the types of plants that will grow in that area with varying root depth and grass height. Short grass prairie needs about 25 centimetres of rain a year. Mixed or middle grass prairie, 50 centimetres of rain per year, and the tall prairie up to 88 centimetres of rain per year. There we are, the prairies, the grasslands created by grazing animals, which run all the way down from Canada to the Mexican border. Fine rescue root system. 2/3 of grass plants are the roots from which the grasses grow, regardless of burning, grazing and flooding for some 30 days. The Somerset levels can withstand 35 days of flooding. They've never had to cope with what they've had this year, and I'm going to come to that later. On the right you've got the short and the tall prairie grass roots, and you can see the lady standing there, and you can see that 2/3 of those plants or more is roots. And with the prairie grasses, the root systems are absolutely amazing. 50 miles of roots from 1 square yard. Prairie grass, they're recovering from fire. You can do anything with grass, but it always grows from the roots. So you trample on it, burn it, dig it up, chop it up, it'll come back from the roots. And here you have a recent fire, you can see the level of fire on the post, and you've got a whole range of upland plant seeds in the top layers of the soil are stimulated to germinate as a result of burning. They've all done it before for millions of years. Every precious cowpat counts. Number 1 cowpat when it's reasonably fresh, several weeks probably there, and then that's the same picture of the same cowpat. Dung, insects, pollination, plants, bird chick food and invertebrate food chain thanks to the cowpat. Plants recorded on land grazed by cattle and sheep all year round for 40 years, a Welsh record of 106 plant species, and they're still adding to that list, the record in Wales. So you get the plants when you have the animal manure, dung and urine and the animal grazing. We've been told that we take the animals off because we don't get the plants. It's a very fundamental, terrible mistake made by the ecologists. And here we have the Somerset levels, the deliberate flooding of the Somerset levels by the decision to stop dredging the main drainage channels in place since the 1600s. Prime agricultural land, in part used for grazing, upland store cattle go down and graze, and the minister involved was Elliot Morley. The RSPB, the EU, the Labour politics and the Environment Agency are all responsible. And there's a very, very good report by Richard North which you can find on the British Wildlife Management website called A Very European Disaster. The fact that we have government organisations flooding such large areas of the countryside with massive losses of wildlife as a consequence of that flooding too is just beyond belief. So we have to ask why, what the heck is going on?